Well, hello, friends. It is good to be with you, even though we are not together in person. I'm going to try my hardest to look at the little pinhole of a video camera instead of focusing on the timer, or even instead of looking at my own face, because that sometimes happens. But again, it is good to be with you. Even though we can't be together in person. I don't know about you, but the last couple of weeks here in the greater San Francisco Bay Area have felt topsy-turvy, to say the least. Maybe it's also felt completely upside down and upending to you. I've thought recently about how our lives are now filled with grief, even if it's not the loss of someone we love. It's a loss of that which we knew. It's a loss of that which our children knew. It's a loss of jobs. It's a loss of the workplace. It's a loss of routine and the way things were. And there's grief in that. And it's easy for our souls to get lost. So yesterday I sat down and I said, everything I was planning to say, we're going to change it. There's something else. There's something else that God has for us today, which is still a message of caring for our souls. But because of and with everything that's been going on, I needed to sit down and be with God and let this be rewritten. Perhaps like you, soul care has been the last thing on my mind. Instead, caring for my sons and my family, they've become first and foremost. We're just over here in Oakland, so were we to stand in Alameda, we could probably wave to many of you across the bay. But it's meant feeling upturned again in a lot of ways. It's meant feeding them. It's meant not going crazy or going crazy. When home becomes school and home is not just a place of rest and solace anymore, when siblings become their only playmates. So it has been a week in which I've come to realize that I have to have some element of caring for my soul, but I've wondered how to do that. Because if this season is showing me anything, and perhaps if it's showing you anything too, it's reminding me to let go of the need to achieve, to instead surrender to being present, because that's the only thing I can do. It's reminding me that the deepest part of who I am is with God and is met by God. It's reminding me that in this deep place, which is our soul, this deep place needs to be satisfied and feel filled and be filled as well. And so, what does that mean? There's a quote that I found just a couple of days ago. It says this, it's from Dallas Willard, so you can write this down if you want to. But Willard says, if God is the great longing of our souls, God will become the pole star of our inward beings. Let me read that one more time. If God is the great longing of our souls, God will become the pole star of our inward beings. So what does that mean in the midst of worldwide pandemics? What does that mean in the midst of sleepless nights, with a newborn, or maybe with a 2-year-old when there is not enough coffee in the world? What does that mean in the midst of virtual play dates? My 5-year-old son just got a text. Well, he doesn't technically have a cell phone, but I just got a text from one of his little buddies, and her mom said, "Hey, could we just have a virtual play date?" And so the two of them sat across from one another with their iPhones on FaceTime, having a play date with one another and being together, even though we couldn't be together in the flesh. What does that mean in the midst of hunkering down, of sheltering in place? What does that mean in the midst of wondering if we can even do this another day, let alone another hour or another minute? What does it mean to lean into the belief and into the knowledge and into the knowing and into the truth that God is present and God continues to be the great longing of our souls, the pole star of our inward being? So we're going to do a couple of things together. It makes me go, where do we go from here? Because this isn't about me offering you another list of things to do, another to-do list for you to get through your day with. It's not about me trying to get you to produce more. That's not at all what it is. These are practices. These are ways of resetting. These are ways of entering into being with God that maybe you might be able to adopt one of and say, I'm going to do this. My soul long and yearns and needs to connect with God. So I'm going to try to do this right now. I'm going to take this seriously. And this practice might be a way for this part of my soul, which so deeply needs to be satisfied by God, because my soul is satisfied with God alone, for that to happen even in the midst of what's going on in our world. So I've got 10 ideas for you, literally. I wrote them down. We're super fancy today, my friends, super fancy. I've got a ton of illustrations that are also all over my office. If anyone were to come into this room and touch anything, it would just be knocked down to the floor. But this is where we are today. So the first thing, maybe the only thing your soul needs, or the only thing your soul can do, even though I don't want to use phrases like doing, is to simply cling to a couple of verses. One friend the other day, she posted on Facebook, and there will be a later thought on social media, but she said, the only thing my soul can do right now is to cling to these 2 verses. And she posted Matthew 6:34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Friends, to me, that verse feels more true than ever before, as the news changes literally by the hour. By the time this post gets to you, news will have changed. We will be in a different spot than we were even 24 hours ago. And yet, what does it mean to not worry and to be present in the moment and to say, yes, God, I am going to lean into you, and my soul is going to cling to you and to your truth that is present in and through these verses, because that's the only thing I can do right now. The other verse that my friend wrote down, she said, I'm also going to cling to Lamentations 3:22 and 23. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. For God's compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. What does it mean to see God's compassions made new every morning? The other day I was doing a worksheet with my 7-year-old son, and he needed to read the words that were there and then match them to the rhyming words, but they were some new words that he didn't necessarily know, so he had to say them out loud. And so at one point he looked at the picture, and it was a picture of a smiling cartoon face little boy, and he looked at it and he said, joy. And I read it and I said, I don't think it's joy. The word was actually glad, but I was like, wow, he just saw joy in that picture. And later on, again, he actually sounded it out, and he then matched glad with, I don't know, sad or bad, whatever it was. But I kept thinking back to that. What does it mean to see joy? What does it mean to see that God's mercies are new every morning, that God's compassion never fails us, because great is thy faithfulness? For us to see and to enter into this compassion and this joy and these new mercies that are given every single day. What does that mean for us to see that? Maybe you take those 2 verses, Matthew 6:34, Lamentations 3:22 and 23. Maybe you write those on a note card and you tape those above your kitchen sink. Maybe you do the same in the laundry room. Maybe you bust out your watercolor paints, that which you usually just have your children do for free time. And on a piece of paper, you then paint those verses. Maybe you adopt them, because clinging to them is the only thing your soul can do right now. Number 2, our souls are filled by the ones we love, by the ones who love us. Get your team around you. It's okay for that to be a part of the soul filling that you need. If we were actually sitting at our MOPS tables right now and you were to look at the women around you, what would it mean to say, yeah, I may never have chosen these people, but God chose these women for me? What would it mean for us to continue to gather together as small groups and as a large MOPS group over Zoom? What would it mean to seek out relationships with people over Marco Polo? I just had a friend introduce Marco Polo, the Marco Polo app, to me this last week. And she said, it's kind of like social media for old people. And I was like, are you calling me old? And she goes, I'm just saying. But it's been what my soul has needed this last week, to enter into the everyday, the beauty of the everyday with the different friends around the United States. So what does it mean for us to enter into that, to get creative over Zoom, over FaceTime, over Marco Polo, to gather with our, with our tables, to connect with one another, to reach out. If someone comes to mind, to shoot them a text, to not just let that pass through, but to let ourselves connect and be connected with the people in our lives. Because I don't know about you, but one of the things that's really hard about sheltering in place is not being able to be in physical proximity with other people. I mean, especially, I say this to the moms of super young kids, that can sometimes be your only lifeline. So friends, how can we support one another? How can we continue to be lifelines to one another in this season? And it might be getting your team around you. That being said, number 3, maybe one way to care for your soul is to practice silence. Just earlier today, you know how the weekly app pops up, and or not the app, but the thing can pop up that tells you how much time you've been on your cell phone, and or on social media, and it popped up for me, and I was like, oh sweet Jesus, I was on my phone a lot this week. And granted, some of the time was my children being on the phone, and that which had to actually happen through school. But one of the things I realize is that if I'm at a point or a place of stress, it's really easy for me just to go, okay, here we go. And then to let my mind and my ears and my eyes be filled with noise. So lately I've been intentionally entering into silence and not having any sort of noise around me. I've been stepping into the backyard for just 5 minutes, but just to look. My backyard is right beyond, that's where I'm looking right now. To see the squirrels, to see the neighbor cat, to see the palm tree, to see how the wind kind of makes the branches flutter like fingers in the wind. And I've just been using that time to say, God, what do you have for me? Even if that time isn't filled with an answer, but just to look and to be stilled. This matters. Whether we're doing the laundry, whether we're hunkering down in the bathroom for 5 minutes. I mean, our husbands do that all the time. Let's just be honest. But what would it mean for us to enter into 5 minutes of silence and to be found by God in those 5 minutes? Number 4, perhaps in the same vein or thread, go on a walk. Maybe it's with your kids. Maybe it's a silent walk, though. See if you can make that happen. Maybe it's a nature walk. Get out in nature. That is something we're still able to do, even if we have a 6-foot barrier between us. But the truth is that some of us deeply connect with God in nature. There are different ways to connect with God. This is another talk for another day, but some of us are naturalists. So literally the place that we most meet God is in nature. Some of us are activists. So the place that we most meet God is when the deepest needs of the world are made present. Some of us meet God through our senses or through aesthetics, through tradition. There are so many different ways that we meet God, and even more that God meets us. And so maybe part of this season right now of sheltering in place is to say, okay, God, where do we most meet one another? And if that is maybe in nature, because it's also a really healthy thing to do, get out. We've been daily going on nature walks, we as in my boys and I. And so the other day, I busted out my old scrapbook paper because apparently I still have a lot of it. And we went on a nature walk, and then this was created by Theo, my younger son, but he made a face. Can you see it? So we also got the hot glue gun out. It was in the same box as the scrapbook paper. Y'all, I have stuff to send. If any of y'all need it, I will send it over to the peninsula. But we've got eyeballs, we've got eyebrows. I think the eyebrows are made out of either rosemary or pine needles. I'll have to smell them later. We've got a nose, we've got a mouth, we've got, I don't know, maybe this is some sort of like goatee on the bottom here. Maybe this is a beard, maybe it's a neckline, I'm not sure. But we've gone on nature walks, and sometimes we've instituted National Be Quiet on the nature walk time just so we can look. I've just had my phone in my pocket just in case I've needed it, but I've not then let myself listen to a podcast or anything else, but I've simply been out to walk in nature and to be filled and refueled in that way. Number 5, when it comes to soul care, we rest. Maybe what your soul most needs right now is to simply be and to rest in God. And it doesn't actually need a list of practices, because just having one more to-do list, that's not how we connect with God. We don't achieve any sort of merit in that way. But maybe the biggest invitation for you right now is to simply find rest in God alone. Psalm 62, my soul finds rest in God alone. So maybe the invitation to you and for you is not to produce. It's not to have any sort of checklist, but it's simply to rest and to be with God in that way. Number 6, maybe what our souls most need right now is to enter into some sort of ancient practice. Maybe because one of the things we get to do is we get to routinely and regularly reevaluate that which we're doing to connect with God. Here is our soul which deeply longs to be filled and to connect with God. And so if that is what our soul needs, which it is, because our souls yearn to be filled with God, this is soul care, this is our souls being filled and cared for by God, then maybe we need something new, and maybe that's an ancient tradition. When I'm done with these 10 ideas, I actually want to extend an invitation to you into one of these practices, which we're going to do together if you want. That first practice, though, is called lectio divina, and it's simply an ancient way of entering into Scripture through the senses and through imagination. I'll be busting out my old Bible. This is probably from, circa 1999, and we'll be entering into this when this is all over. But lectio divina is a great way to enter in, either by yourself. My preference is to do this with other people. This would be great to do alongside some other women over Zoom, over Google Chat, something like that. Another one, this is an ancient practice, is an ancient Jesuit practice called consolation and desolation. This one is my favorite to do at the end of the day before I bust out my nighttime novel. I love to simply lie in bed, and consolation is simply saying, where did God show up today? And it's letting yourself remember and recognize and point out those places that were filled with God. And maybe you write these down. Maybe you just think them and let them plummet into your soul. Desolation then is saying, where did I not necessarily feel God's presence? And letting that be recognized as well. But consolation and desolation, I encourage you, go look it up. This is a great practice, especially at the end of the day. Finally, 2 apps that you can install because, again, right now, a lot of us are finding that this piece, that the connection that we need, there is a lot of connection that exists right here. But there's 2 apps I want to recommend. One is the Pray As You Go app. It's also from the Jesuits. Apparently, I really like the Jesuits. But Pray As You Go app, it's a free one. It'll even be complete with these phenomenal British voices who will just speak soothing words of prayer and scripture and very short meditation over you. There's also a great one called The Examine. So maybe that's something that that you could look into if that is a practice that might fill a part of you right now. Just a few more. Read a book. If you are a person that finds peace connecting with the words on a page. I'm a writer. I'm an author. I'm always supposed to plug my book. But if you need a book to read right now, this is actually not the main one I was going to show you, but you can pick up a copy of The Color of Life by Cara Meredith. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, at your local independent bookstore, wherever books are sold, or you can order one through me specifically. But there's a book you can read. Otherwise, 3 books that I just grabbed from my shelf that are all specifically in that soul care realm that I highly recommend, that are all also from women writers, 3 friends of mine. I'm just going to give them to you now. I will also send these in some notes. But the first one is Making Peace with Change. It's by Gina Boots. And y'all, I don't know if there is a better book for us to be reading right now with all the change that's going on in the world than this one. Second one, I love this one. It's specifically about caring for ourselves and simply having and receiving permission to be who we are. Permission Granted. It's by Melissa Kamara Wilkins. But the subtitle, Be Who You Were Made to Be and Let Go of the Rest. Maybe that's part of the invitation right now in caring for your soul. And the last one is this, Courtney Ellis. She's hilarious. She's written a couple of books. She's coming out with her 3rd this summer. But this is called Almost Holy Mama, Life-Giving Spiritual Practices for Weary Parents. That's part of what soul care is. But I just love this one. Super easy and fun to read, and really just digs into caring for our soul. So I recommend those. I will send those to you over email with some ideas. But the same, it doesn't have to be a Christian novel or a Christian book either, excuse me. I've been finding a whole lot of life lately through YA. Here's my Kindle with my Oregon State, where I grew up, decal on the front. I've been reading some Irish murder mysteries, which, you know what, that is part of what I've needed lately. So it's simply a matter, how do we connect with God, and what does it mean for us to be filled in this way? I encourage you to just take a minute to listen and to find out where God might be meeting you. 3 left. Dig into art. Get creative. Again, I showed you that picture of what our boys have been creating with old scrapbook paper and nature objects. Just yesterday, I went and I grabbed a couple of things of paint that I've had sitting in the garage for 5 years probably, and began to paint this one chair because it was what I needed, and it was so therapeutic to see the results of something so tangibly, but to also just rest in letting the brush go and to say, oh God, okay, God, I know you are here in the peace of this moment, and I accept that, and I let my soul be cared for as the brush strokes go. Brush strokes, that kind of sounded like breast strokes with swimming, but we're not allowed in pools right now, so there you go. Cooking, maybe this is an invitation for you to get creative in the kitchen. I know it's a lot to feed small children, but maybe as they dive into chicken nuggets, you dive into finding something, finding a recipe that brings you a little life, that includes more than 4 ingredients. Whatever it is, what does it mean to dig into art, to dig into those places that most make us feel alive, especially for those of us who are sensates or ascetics, in the sense that we connect with God through these different parts of our being and through creativity. If that is you, then what does it mean to answer that and to say, yes, I know that as I step into this, even in the midst of everything going on, that God is faithful and God will meet me there. 2 left. Number 9, limit your time on social media. And I know that's hard, again, and it might even seem or feel contradictory with everything I've already said. But if that means that, if especially if right now, if this is causing stress or a lack of peace for you, if this is heightening your anxiety, then maybe you need to uninstall some apps from your phone. There, you can see my kids when they were babies. Maybe it means uninstalling some apps. Maybe it means not having Facebook and Twitter and Instagram on your phone. Maybe it means setting a timer and saying, okay, I'm going to let myself be present on social media for half an hour a day. I'm going to let myself watch 1 news cycle or read 1 article. Maybe it means whatever it is. Maybe it's just a matter of noticing when we are feeling anxious, when we are experiencing anxiety, and perhaps doing something about it. So set a timer, find other ways to connect with people. There's this little old-fashioned way called writing a letter. I have a whole box of stationery that needs to be sent out. So I think one of my invitations in the coming weeks is probably going to be to look up some addresses and to send some letters to loved ones that I haven't talked to in a while. And the last one is to make music. What does it mean for us to enter in, especially again for those of us who are filled with and by experiencing the depths of music? And maybe that's through worship, maybe that's through simply dance, maybe that's through classical music, maybe that's through making music ourselves. But make room and space for this, because again, if that's where you come alive, then that's also where God most meets us. A soul fully alive in this world means that God is meeting us in these different places, and that might be different for every single one of us. One of my friends, they're just a couple miles away in Oakland. They're hosting a neighborhood concert from their deck. And so they're getting out, and they're not all that great. They're not professional musicians, but they are standing up on their porch, and they're leading songs every night, and the kids are playing drums and ukulele, and they're singing, and their neighbors are coming and gathering 6 feet apart from one another, but they're participating in this together. I've noticed so many musicians who are hosting Facebook concerts right now. Obviously, you can go onto Spotify or Pandora. You can bust out your CD collection from the late 90s. You can enter into all of this. You can sit down. I've got a piano over on the side of my room over there of my office, but you can make music. You can play. You can let yourself be filled by God in these different ways. You can have a family dance party. You can dance by yourself. Whatever it is, though, what does it mean for us to enter into this together and to say, yes, my soul, a soul fully alive, means a soul that is met with God and by God in the deepest parts of who I am. And what does this mean collectively for we as the people of God to be met and to be filled as such, for our souls to be satisfied in that way? One of the things that I want to invite you into in our remaining time together is, again, something that I mentioned, but it's the ancient art of lectio divina. This is something I've been practicing for almost 20 years now, most of the time with other people. But it's been an honor when I've gotten to do this also in larger groups. Now, this is the first time that I've ever done it, or am ever inviting you to do this with me virtually, when we're also not interacting at the same time. For instance, over Facebook Live or Zoom or Google. But I think that God can and still will meet us here. So what I encourage you to do, stretch if you need to for just a second. I'm going to take a drink of water as well. This is also something that if you want to save this portion, the last 10 to 15 minutes of our time together, for another time, then you can. But otherwise, what we're going to do is we are going to enter into a time, again, of lectio divina, of being met by God. We're specifically going to focus on Psalm 23, which is originally when MOPS asked me to speak last summer. It was the scripture that we were going to lean into together. So instead of me teaching specifically from that, we're going to lean into it as people of God together through another ancient practice. You can grab a Bible if you have one, but you also don't have to, because there's power in the words simply being read over you. You can grab a journal or something to write with if you want, but you don't have to. That doesn't tend to be a part of my practice when I do lectio divina, but for some people that is a really important part. So we're going to start right now with our lectio divina time by just taking a minute or two of silence. So I encourage you, if you can, to close your eyes and to still yourself, to let yourself be stilled. Sometimes in this time, it's helpful to repeat a word or phrase, like God be with us, peace be still, Come thou fount, glory of God. Whatever it is, repeat that in your mind. We're going to take about a minute or two of silence. God, we thank you that you are here with us in this time. Show us that you are here as we know you are. Amen. Now what we're going to do is we're simply going to listen for a word or phrase. I'm going to read from Psalm 23. I'm reading from the Message translation by Eugene Peterson. And as I read this, I encourage you not, actually, if you have your Bible, I encourage you not to follow along in your own. I encourage you just to listen, because you're going to listen. You're going to use this sense to listen for a word or phrase that sticks out to you. I'll read through this 2 times, and then we'll have another minute or 2 of silence. And again, just listen for a word or phrase that sticks out to you. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid. When you walk at my side, your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I am not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. Take about a minute to think about that word or phrase that sticks out to you. Write it down if you feel like it, or just let yourself remember. Normally what we would do is we would go around our circle, or if we were in a larger group setting, we would let a couple of people speak as to their word or phrase. So right now, you can write it down. Maybe if you are watching this almost at the same time as one of your other fellow MOPS mamas, you can text them. You could say, what was your word or phrase? This was my word or phrase. My word or phrase was your trusty shepherd's crook. My word or phrase was true to your word. My word or phrase was my shepherd. Now we're going to listen to the text a second time. This is something, again, that you can do by yourself. You can just read it. I think also there's power in the word being read out loud. So if you're by yourself, maybe challenge yourself to read this a couple of times if you are to adopt this later. I'm going to read through it a second time, and I'll read through it twice again. Also, if we were in a smaller group, what we would do is we would also switch off the readers as to hear different voices. Because sometimes when different people read it, or oftentimes, we'll hear something that we didn't hear before. So this time as I read it, I want you to listen again for a word or phrase that sticks out to you. It might be the same one, it might be something different. And I also want you to listen for something to do or be in the coming week. Actually, I just got ahead of myself. I'm sorry, I'm getting so caught up. Listen for your word or phrase, and then also listen for an image or a picture that comes with it. Perhaps you sit with it, and again, you imagine God as your shepherd. You imagine not being afraid and what that looks like as a grown-up, whatever it is. So let yourself imagine a picture that goes with it. Psalm 23. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid. When you walk at my side, your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head, my cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. Take a moment of silence. You can pause the video also if you need to, if you need more time of silence. Normally we would take longer. We would take an extended 5 to 10 minutes in between each one. But again, listen for a word or phrase that just stuck out to you. And then an image. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What do you feel when you see it, when you hear this particular passage? How do your senses come alive? So again, if you're doing this by yourself, perhaps you write this down in a journal, or perhaps you just let your heart, your whole soul, your soul hold it for a second. If you are watching this simultaneously as some of your sisters, maybe you text them right now. What word or phrase stuck out to you this time? What was your image? What did you sense? Maybe you reach out to me, carameredith.com. You can also find me all over social media. You say, wow, this was Psalm 23 to me, and this is what stuck out. This is what I kept hearing. This is the image that came to my mind. Personally, I couldn't get that very last verse and image out of my head. I'm back home. it can't be more true than that right there. I'm back home right now in the house of the Lord. And as I sat there, I imagined my house. And I almost saw these little hearts coming out of it, kind of like steam or smoke, from a chimney, just lifting out. This is the invitation right now. Being at home right here. This is the invitation. This is what I sense. This is what I see. And this last time, I kind of already gave it away. But we're going to listen to it just one last time. I won't do a second reading of it. But this time, listen for your word or phrase. You've probably centered down on that word or phrase. But listen for that word or phrase. And then with that, listen for something that God might be inviting you to be or do in the coming week. God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. Even when the way goes through Death Valley, I'm not afraid when you walk at my side. Your trusty shepherd's crook makes me feel secure. You serve me a 6-course dinner right in front of my enemies. You revive my drooping head. My cup brims with blessing. Your beauty and love chase after me every day of my life. I'm back home in the house of God for the rest of my life. Take a moment in silence, listen for that word or phrase. Also, listen for something that God might be inviting you to be or do in the coming week. Feel free to pause this video if you need a longer time of silence. Normally what we would do right now is we would go around, and just like the times before, we would share a word and phrase or phrase. We would share also the invitation of what we sense that God is inviting us to be or do. You can write it in your journal. You can simply hold it in your heart. You can text or reach out to a friend. You can text or, well, I guess maybe not text me, but you can reach out to me. But what is God inviting you into? What's the invitation? Your soul's invitation this week. After that, we would enter into prayer. If we were in a group together, we would pray for the person sitting next to us, and we would receive prayer from the person on our other side. So I encourage you to think about how you might continue to pray for the people of God, for those in your church community, for those in your Monday morning MOPS group, for how you might continue to lean into Scripture and into the invitation from God from this morning's passage too. Friends, it has been good being with you. I am just about at the 45-minute mark, so I'm going to get going. But thank you for entering into this special time with me. I will send over resources. We will make sure that you get those. But otherwise, might your souls be cared for, even in the midst of the right now. You are loved. Go in peace.